Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very excited to talk to you all today. We're just going to wait a few minutes to allow folks to join us on the live stream and also in the webinar before we begin. So I think we'll wait and start around 12:03. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We're just waiting a few minutes to get started until people can join the webinar. So we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're excited to see you coming into the webinar. We're just going to wait one more minute before we start. We'll be going momentarily. All right, Nina, I think we're ready to go.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Happy 2022. My name is Nina Idemudia, and I'm an Assistant Commissioner with the Department of Planning and Development. On behalf of Mayor Lightfoot, welcome. We're excited to tell you about this exciting new grant opportunity being offered to Chicago's entrepreneurs through the Chicago Recovery Plan. With us today are my colleagues from the Planning Department and also from the Office of the Mayor. Starting now, you can drop any questions you have into the Q&A box. You can find that by hitting the Q&A button on Zoom, which will be located either at the top of your screen or at the bottom of your screen, depending on what type of device you're using. My colleagues here will, in the planning department and the mayor's office, they will do their best to answer all of your questions directly here in Zoom. We also have a verbal Q&A later on that will be moderated by my colleague from the planning department, Gabby Jessic. We've had almost 1,500 people register for this event on Zoom and dozens more watching live on YouTube. That's a lot for us to manage, as you can imagine, but we're going to do our best here to answer your questions as soon as possible in the time that we have allotted. If we don't get to your question, do please email us at dpd@cityofchicago.org. So let me say that again, dpd@cityofchicago.org. dpd@cityofchicago.org. It's a tongue twister for me for some reason. That inbox is checked several times a day, each weekday from our communication staff. So you will get an answer to your question if you email that in from the appropriate members of our staff as soon as possible. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. We can go to the next slide. So our agenda today, we're going to do a program overview. I'm going to explain what is the Chicago Recovery Plan. And then I'm going to go through this particular program that we're talking about today, which is a community development grant overview, and talk about eligibility. And then we're going to talk about the application process and give you some tips for applying. And then, of course, we'll do a Q&A at the end. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so for some of you who may not know what the Chicago Recovery Plan is, it is a mix of federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan, as well as Chicago's economic development bond dollars, which total $1.2 billion in investments that we'll be making over the next few years for the city of Chicago. You know, through community engagement, consultation, analysis, we've developed a plan that we hope will drive true transformational change here in the city of Chicago. Two key areas of the plan is significant investments in the well-being of people and communities to allow them to thrive and collectively improve community safety. We know, as we all know, a lot of communities have been hard hit by the coronavirus, and that's the whole reason for these dollars to be integrated into the communities. And the second thing is strategic investments to create equitable economic development and recovery in Chicago's neighborhoods and in the communities hardest hit by the pandemic. So those are the two overarching reasons that we're talking about the Chicago Recovery Plan today. Next slide. And as you know, there's various departments that were allocated those dollars all throughout the city. We're talking about today a program from the Department of Planning and Development. So those three buckets that you see kind of outlined in blue there are what the Department of Planning and Development will be in charge of moving forward. So we're talking about community development, we're talking about small business and workforce support, and we're also talking about community climate investments. Next slide. So this particular program is the community development grants. So the purpose of this program is kind of to expand on the work that DPD has already been doing in the communities. I know many of you are familiar with our programs such as the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund or the Small Business Improvement Fund. These dollars are helping us to capitalize on some of the work that we've already done, but also broaden the scope of what we're able to do with these federal dollars and the economic development bond dollars. So through these grants, we hope to strengthen local corridors, we hope to enhance neighborhood vitality, and we also hope to drive equitable economic development. You can go to the next slide. So program overview. So the grant can be used for expansion or renovation of existing businesses. It can also be used for new locations to start up businesses or existing businesses. It can also be used for new construction at vacant properties. The grant amount is split up into two different realms. So we're accepting or we're going to make awards up to $5 million if it's applicable. So we have a small grant track, which is up to $250,000. And then we have a large grant track that is between that $250,000 and $5 million range. And the grants cannot exceed more than 75% of the total project cost. So please do keep that in mind as you gear up your application. You can go to the next slide. So eligibility. This application is open to commercial, mixed use, and light manufacturing, business owners and entrepreneurs, property owners, and community developers, and applicants from all over the city. So if you've had any prior experiences with our NOF applications, you can tell that we've been able to open up our geographic limitations and some of the other limitations that we have with project type. Eligible expenses include things like major exterior and interior renovations, build outs for incoming businesses, acquisition, architectural engineering fees, roofing, mechanical systems, security systems, ADA accessibilities. Those are just a few of the things that are included for eligible expenses. We can go to the next slide. So The Chicago Recovery Plan expands the eligibility beyond our current programs, as I mentioned on that last slide. So our locations are not limited to specific corridors. Our light manufacturing projects and mixed use residential projects are eligible, which in past programs that we've had, they haven't been. And that kind of like vanilla box or white box projects in which there's no tenant yet, but you're a property owner or a building owner that's trying to get your building ready to receive a tenant, we're also accepting applications for that. Next slide, please. Project selection. Project priority will be given to applicants that incorporate these components. So we're looking for catalytic projects with strong local impact. So job creation, amenities, and services that benefit the community, alignment with local community plans and community wealth building, et cetera. We're looking for projects located in historically disinvested areas that build upon the existing efforts, such as Invest Southwest and Community Safety Initiative. We're also looking at projects that demonstrate momentum and that are expected to break ground in 2022. So with this particular round, we are looking for things that are what we call quote unquote shovel ready, and site control is preferred. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague from DPD, Sophia Carey, to walk you through the application process.
Great. Thank you so much, Nina. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Before I get started on the application process, I just wanted to give a quick intro. My name is Sophia Carey, and I run the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund program, specifically working with those that are seeking funds of less than $250,000. The next part of the webinar is, as Nina mentioned, talking about not just the process, but the requirements to submit a strong application. For those who are familiar with the NOF, you'll notice there's a lot of similarities, but the biggest difference that I want to again emphasize, which Nina had already mentioned, is that we have opened up the eligibility. So not only is our projects across the city not eligible to apply for the CRP grant, there are also different types of business activities that are now eligible as well. So we are super thrilled about the city's ability to do this at this time. So talking a little bit about the application process. The CRP grant has 3 rounds this year. And they are rolling rounds, with the first application deadline being January 31st. The reason for this is that we know some of you are already ready to get started on your projects. And if that is the case, we want you to go ahead and get started with your application as soon as possible so that we can get shovels in the ground, we can get work going, and get these projects completed as quickly as possible. The second and the third round deadlines are for those who might currently be in an idea or a visualization stage, which means they know what they want, but maybe they haven't quite planned out how to bring that to fruition. As I had mentioned, we are really looking for applications that have gone through significant planning and can demonstrate an ability to get completed. So the additional time to the March 10th deadline and the late summer deadline, which will be announced shortly after that, is to allow other applicants the time that they need to do the planning and to be able to provide all of those details in their application. There are 2 types of applications. There is the small grants application, which is for anyone who is interested in a grant of up to $250,000. And then there is a large grants application, which is for anyone that is seeking a grant of over $250,000. Every applicant will need to determine which track they pursue. You will not be able to apply for both for the same project. The small grants project is going to have an application that is online. It will be opening tomorrow, Friday, January the 7th, and it will be using the Submittable platform, which for those who are familiar with the NOF program is the same platform that is used for that grant as well. The large grants program is actually already available. There is an editable PDF and a supplemental developer input form that is required Applicants should complete those 2 forms and then either email it or hit the submit button on the editable PDF to get that submitted. Next slide. So a little bit more detail about the small grants application through Submittable. As I had mentioned, it's going to open tomorrow. And to access it, you're just going to need to go to chicago.gov/Shy Recovery Grant. From there, you will be able to access our project assessment. It's a very quick, short 7-question quiz that will really assess, do you have the details already for a successful application? If you do, based on how you answer those 7 questions, it will forward you to the actual application. If it looks like you need a little bit more planning, what it's going to do is actually going to direct you to additional resources, specifically websites and our community partners who are available to really help you plan out your project so that you can submit a successful application. For those who have never used Submittable before, it is a great platform. And one of the first things you're going to want to do when you start the application process is to create your account. That account will allow you to save your draft application and go back to it over the course of many days up until the deadline and work on it as you're, at the pace that you need to. It also has a really powerful tool to allow you to invite others to collaborate with you. So if you are the application owner, you can, through the Submittable system, invite, say, your partner, maybe your lender, any other individuals that are part of your team that will help make sure that your project is completed. Invite them into your application so that they can see exactly what is being submitted. They can help edit your materials, input the materials, and at the very end, as the owner of the application, you will have the ability to just hit the submit button. And don't forget, you can submit via the portal before the deadline. Anyone can open their application tomorrow, and then based on how complete or how comfortable you are with your application, you can either submit it at the end of this month, in March, or at the last deadline. For anyone who wants to get started right away on looking at their application today, there is a PDF of the application questions that are currently posted online at the Shy Recovery Grant website. You can take a look at that, but just remember, we are not accepting hard copy applications for the small grants program. You have to go through the online application once it opens tomorrow. Next slide. So for the large grants program, you're going to go to the exact same website, chicago.gov/Shy Recovery Grants. And there you will find the editable PDF. And you will see that it says grants for more than $250,000. You'll be able to download it. You will be able to follow the instructions in the application to complete it. And then again, you'll be submitting it via the submit button or through the email address, FID, which stands for Financial Incentives Division, FID_intake@cityofchicago.org. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to move a little bit into the application tips so that you know what we are anticipating, what we expect, and can really submit a strong and successful application. Our goal is to make sure that you use your time wisely and that you put your best foot forward, your best proposal for your project forward. So application tip number 1 is really about project readiness. Do you have a plan to take the idea that you have and bring it to fruition? And what are the details of that plan? So what are we looking for here? We're looking for, do you already have site control? And if you don't, do you have a secure path to site control? So if you're saying, you know what, there's a vacant lot that's 2, corners down from my house, and I think it would be really great to open a hot dog stand there, but you don't know how you're going to be able to get the permission to use that site, you're going to need to do a little bit of planning and a little bit of research. Second is your plan for construction. Do you know what it's going to take to get your project completed? For most of the projects that are seeking grants at this point, we are expecting that a City of Chicago building permit is required. So if that is the case, are you familiar with the permitting process? If you're not, we've got resources available on the website that explains from step 1 to the end how to get a building permit. Itemized costs. Do you know how much it's really going to cost? And I would say, as a kind of a personal advice, I would be conservative on that. So if you think it's going to cost $100,000, you know what? Make sure you put in some contingency, whether it's the minimum 10%, which we're going to ask everyone to put in their application, or if you want to increase that to 20 or 30%, you need to make sure that you start the project with enough resources in the bank to get this project accomplished. And finally, applicant equity. So the max amount that the grant can cover is 75% of your total project costs, which means that you'll need to demonstrate at least 25% of your total project cost, how you're going to get it, or if you already have it, where is it coming from? The 7-question project assessment will take you through these and a couple of other details to help you decide whether it makes sense for you to go forward with the application. If it directs you to resources, we really encourage you to take that to heart and do more of the planning and identify more of the details of your plan. Because if you move on to the application, so, for example, if some people, will choose to redo the project assessment and answer the questions the way they think the system is looking for just to get to the application, you know what? You're actually going to be asked for more detailed information about each one of these 4 areas. So you're just going to end up hitting the same challenges in terms of not being able to have the details needed to submit a strong application. Next slide, please. Okay, so application tip number 2 is we're really looking for the quality and the level of community engagement in every application. What does that mean? It means that the project you're proposing, how excited does the community, is the community about that project? Do you know how well it meets the needs or the interests of that area? So how do you determine how much community engagement your project is going to provide? One is take a look at the community plans. Many of the neighborhoods in the city of Chicago have plans that talk about what are the key amenities or services that they are hoping to build and develop in the neighborhood. Talk to the community individuals. So whether that's the residents, whether that is their elected representative, whether it is other businesses on that corridor, really understand how your proposed project and business is going to affect those that are living and working in that neighborhood. And finally, the corridor conditions. How familiar are you with the conditions of not just your project site, but the entire corridor and how your project will impact that corridor? Do you know about any new activity, new investments, new businesses nearby? And how will your project interact or affect the projects that are already occurring on that block? Next slide, please. Okay, application tip number 3 is design impact. So as many of you know, it is extremely important that not only we provide good, needed, necessary amenities and services to the neighborhood, but that we also have safe and beautiful spaces that are welcoming and inclusive. So as part of the application, you will be asked about the design of your project and specifically how the design of your project is going to speak to these 5 areas: equity and inclusion, innovation, sense of place, sustainability, and communication. So as you are working with your design team, whether that is an interior designer or an architect or a general contractor, you really want to ask them and challenge your entire team to think about these 5 areas and what you can do to really make your project stand out in providing a sense of place, celebrating the strength and the culture of our communities, or really committing to sustainability, providing some green or environmentally friendly options. Communication, how open it is, innovation, providing something new and exciting for the community. And then again, equity and inclusion. How are you making sure that your project is going to be open to all residents? Next slide. Okay, so I know I have thrown a lot of, our expectations and requirements at you. And for some of you, maybe this is all things that you've already thought about, which is fantastic. That chances are, if you've thought about all of these things, there's a really strong possibility that you're going to be able to submit an application. For those of you who just thought, wow, there were some questions there that I haven't even thought about, I have very good news for you. And that is, we have a very strong list of resources that are available that talk about a lot of materials that you can read up on, as well as partners that you can engage with that will help you with answering these questions. So please, we recommend that everyone visit the Community Development Grant Resources page and make sure that there aren't nuggets of wisdom there that can really beef up and strengthen your application when you apply. Next slide. Okay, so that pretty much ends it for me. I am going to kick it back to my colleague Gabby at DPD, who's going to help moderate the next portion, which is the Q&A portion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. We've seen a lot of really fantastic questions come in the Q&A box in the Zoom and also on the YouTube stream. So we're going to try to find some of the commonalities in the questions that have been asked so far. If you have specific questions about a very specific type of project that you're working on, the best place to get that answered is probably to email dpd@cityofchicago.org, and we can give you more specific details. So we're going to try to address some of the broader themes of this program. So one that I've seen pop up a lot is about our nonprofits. Are nonprofits eligible for this type of grant? I don't know if Jim or one of the folks who's working on the grants could address that.
Yeah, could you repeat the question again, Gabriella? I'm sorry.
The question is, are nonprofits eligible for this type of grant?
Yeah, and we've been responding to that question in the chat. Yes, nonprofits are eligible. And again, we're going to be looking at each project on their own merit, but nonprofits are encouraged to apply.
Great. One question that came up is, can you receive and use SBIF, Small Business Improvement Fund, or NOF, which is a Neighborhood Opportunity Fund grants at the same time?
We don't encourage that, and I'll take this, Tim, if you want to add on to this. We don't encourage that. We do want to take each one of these projects on their own merits, but we tend to have projects that we have selected before for SBIF and NOF to be self-sufficient, if you will. But again, we understand that sometimes things come up, and we will be considering every application that we have come in.
Yeah, I think I would also just add, I would just encourage people to think about their project and what's the whole need, and don't get caught up in you have this much in this source and this much in this source. If you, for example, had an NOF large award for $1 million, or you had previously applied for $1 million, but you now understand or realize you need $2 million, I would just encourage you to apply again for $2 million. And we can look at your project sort of, through that perspective and understand that you actually need $2 million, and that's fine. It's not a disqualifying factor by any means.
Great. There's a question, can projects that have already broken ground apply?
Yes, I would. We would not, any cost that you've already incurred would be strictly ineligible. And I think that given the level of competitiveness that we anticipate for this, I think there would have to be a compelling case to be made as to why your project started and now you need these funds. So I'm not saying it's strictly ineligible, but there's probably a barrier or at least a hurdle to clear first.
Great. So I think there's kind of a question here. It's like, can we apply for more than one grant per agency for different projects? I think we just want to clarify that this grant program is being run by the Department of Planning and Development. And so any of the grant applications will be going through our staff's processes, as well as some other folks as well. So it's not, this isn't like a CDOT grant or Business Affairs and Consumer Protections. These are related specifically to the Department of Planning and Development. Is that correct? Can I just reiterate that, or?
Yeah,
that's
Gabby,
well
there's
said.
Gabby, there's a question. There's a question I'm answering a lot in writing in the Q&A right now about geographies. There aren't specific commercial corridors. It is open citywide. And that is a key point. If it is located in the Chicago city limits and it is a business, you are eligible to apply.
Yeah, I think that there were a number of questions too, is in terms of the types of projects that we're looking for this. So if we can get a little bit more detail on that from someone on the team in terms of what is exactly eligible.
Yeah, I think people will find more detail when they go to the website and look at what we have listed as eligible projects. But, the things we're looking for the most are those projects that are literally a demonstration of being catalytic in the community, a community benefit, if that can be articulated. And then Sophia alluded to this earlier. We're looking for projects that are ready to go now. Those projects that they have been thought about, or they were about to apply for one of our other grant programs and literally can demonstrate that they can literally launch this year. We're going to be prioritizing those type of projects.
Great. There's a few questions related to using grant funds for property acquisition. Do we just want to clarify that a little bit for the group?
Yeah, I think especially for large projects, acquisition is an eligible cost. It does need to be part of a larger project, though, meaning that you couldn't apply for $1 million to acquire a project, and then 2 years later you are applying for the actual project you want to do. It needs to be part and parcel. It needs to be all together, a sort of complete package, and we can't award acquisition as a standalone grant.
Great. There's a question here about would I need to include a consent letter from a property owner if I am leasing the property?
Yeah, I can jump on that, Tim. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're suggesting doing some work on someone else's building, a demonstration of not only having that lease and that lease for a period of time, because we want to make investments in communities that are going to be there a year or 2 or 3 from now. And then subsequently, we're going to ask that there is, that consent letter for whatever that renovation is going to be to make sure that there's alignment. So the answer is yes.
Great. Just trying to see some of the more specific questions that are in here. If you are able to obtain a grant, how long do you have to complete the project? Just want to reiterate in terms of timing.
I'm not sure. I don't know that we have a very definitive you must spend by X date, although once grants are awarded, that will certainly be coming. I don't know that I have one today, but I think that we intend on awarding grants or awarding projects to grants that would start, meaningfully start work within 6 months. And so, that's not a definitive must be done by 6 months, but we are certainly looking for projects that will, as I said, begin meaningful work within that 6-month time period and therefore be used within 2 years.
Great. There's a question here just about the term catalytic. Can we get a little bit more of a idea about what it means to be a catalytic project?
Yeah, and I can jump on that. I think part of the answer for that question literally is going to lie within that community where that project is going to reside, and an alignment in terms of what that community's goals are, particularly for their commercial geography. There's every community in the city, literally has a plan in terms of what they would like to see for their community. A demonstration of an alignment with that is what we mean by catalytic.
Great. There's a few questions that have popped up in terms of what is the kind of reimbursement model, or how funds would be distributed. So I don't know if we want to share a little bit more detail about that, how the kind of invoices or purchase orders would work.
I think we anticipate that it'll be substantially similar to what both the large and small NOF programs currently have in place, which is you either complete the work and you get paid back as a reimbursement when you finish, or which is the preferred model for most people, I think, is construction escrow, whereas you do the work and we actually will give you the grant throughout your construction term.
Great, thank you. There's a question about vacant lots and whether this could be used in combination with acquiring vacant lots. Is there any additional support for acquiring lots as part of this type of project?
Beyond financial?
I guess just perhaps we should just direct them to our land sales team, if that's
yeah.
Okay.
I think if there is a city-owned lot, I think certainly there's you can, at least in the large, there's a question that specifically says, are you seeking to acquire city-owned land with this? And there is a separate application for city-owned land, and that can be filled out and completed either concurrently or after an application is submitted. But yes, I mean, the city is in the business of selling land that we own, and if it supports a great project, then that's all the better.
Yeah, and if anyone is kind of interested in talking to the DPD team about land sales, you can email landsales@cityofchicago.org, and they should be able to kind of give you more information about specific vacant lots or city property that are available. There's a question about, does this fund industrial buildings or industrial use as well?
Generally, yes. I think it still needs to be sort of meaningful and catalytic, but it's generally yes.
Trying to go through here. I guess there's kind of just a question again about the timeline for the first round of grants and then the following ones. I think maybe if we could just reiterate those dates and kind of how they're divided up would be helpful. I don't know if Sophia or Nicole, you're able to answer that.
I'm sorry, I was busy trying to answer questions in the Q&A. Can you repeat the question?
I think there was just a few questions in terms about timeline for the first round and then the second round, and how what the deadlines are for those. So maybe we just want to reiterate that for everyone.
Sure. So the very first deadline, and I'm not sure if Kevin can.
Yeah, and I've got it in front of me also, Sophia, if it's helpful.
Yeah.
The first deadline is January 31st, which is on a Monday.
March 10th, I believe.
March 10th is the second, and then there's still a date to be determined this late later on this summer.
Yeah. And specifically for anyone that's looking for the grant that is 250 or less, the deadline that you're going to fall into is going to be based on when you hit that submit button. So you can start your application as early as tomorrow once it goes live. And if you hit the submit button before January 31st, you're going to be considered as part of that first pool. If you don't hit the submit button, you continue to work on it and hit the submit button after, January 1st, but before March 10th, you'll get considered as part of that second pool and so on.
There's just been a few questions in terms about, how the funds would be distributed over those dates. So, I don't think we're going to be running out of money for the third round. So I think the best idea would be to really put a lot of time and thought into your application instead of trying to rush to meet the January deadline. So I think that would be my recommendation, just kind of for questions about, there's not going to be necessarily a disadvantage to applying later. It's going to be based on the strength of your application that you put together. Sorry, there's a lot of questions. These are all really great that are coming in. I'm trying to see which ones. Is there any kind of special consideration given to minority or veteran-owned businesses? Or, how we're kind of, discussing that?
I think there's probably equity will be a significant component of this, and particularly through a geographic lens. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Invest Southwest program that is looking at very specific neighborhoods. I think this program will also look at areas that are beyond Invest Southwest, but still in areas that fulfill advancing equity in this administration and Mayor Lightfoot's goal of having economic development be done in the most equitable way possible.
Great, thank you. There's a question of, if a proposed project is not accepted in a first round, can they resubmit in sequential rounds after that?
Yes, and in fact, if a project's not selected for any particular round, that project will receive feedback on why their project was not selected, and we would encourage any applicant to look at that feedback and address what the problem might have been. In some cases, maybe it was that an application referenced getting $100,000 in a bank loan, but there was not a letter of interest from a bank or a term sheet or something like that, and we would give you instruction that says, go find a lender and get that letter of interest, not a commitment, but a letter of interest, and then we'll encourage you to resubmit for the application, having addressed what we see as the issue, and therefore have an improved project, an improved application, and be more likely to be selected.
There's a few questions that are asking about housing specifically and whether these would qualify for any housing developments. Do you just want to explain a little bit more about mixed use and how that would work?
Yeah, I think anything that is exclusively or like very prominently housing is not eligible for this. There are other vectors or other projects and categories through the Chicago Recovery Plan that will support housing, but this is just not one of them. That said, we will, our commercial corridors, all of Chicago's commercial corridors do have buildings that are sort of classic Chicago with retail on the ground floor and some residential above, and we do intend on supporting those projects to the extent that we receive them.
There's a question about kind of a little bit a differential between social services and healthcare and social assistance. you know, I don't know if we want to give a little bit of details for that. I think it's more like if it's a healthcare business, like a dental office or a, you know, a commercial service that is being offered, that does qualify, correct?
Yes, yes, that would qualify. And again, the short answer would be to put in an application because, you know, I'm sure we're going to get some programming that we did not necessarily suggest in the presentation that could be considered. So, you know, you can always reach back to our website and get a direct answer, but we encourage to do the application, make the argument. We want to consider your proposal. We want to consider your projects.
Great. There was a question about whether there's a fee for the application. I just want to iterate there is no fee for applying for this grant at all.
No.
So
None. Never as long as I sit in this desk.
yeah, thank you. There's a question about kind of restaurants and bars and kind of what is the term, dining, kind of would those be eligible for this type of project?
Absolutely.
Great. There's the question about a few of these that have been about what site are the term site control is preferred. Do we just want to explain a little bit more what site control means?
Yeah, and I can take that on. You know, if you actually own the site, you have control of the site. If you are in the middle of negotiating the sale or the purchase of a particular site, you can see where that next person who has demonstrated that site control is going to be one in which we more prefer because that project is absolutely more ready to go. And you guys know, you know, negotiations can sometimes go well and sometimes they don't go so well. So we're looking for those projects who have done some of that early work, but we can go ahead and get them launched off the ground. And I'm going to say this so it's just clear. You know, this is one grant program. We have not eliminated our other grant programs. And so, you know, the rush to be first, the rush to get an application in is not what we are encouraging here. We're encouraging solid applications. And what might not happen between now and January 31st, there is a variety now. I would argue an unprecedented variety now of opportunities to have your project considered for some source of resources, financial resources moving forward, particularly in 2022. This is going to be quite a year.
Thank you, Jim. There's a question about whether architectural drawings would be required to submit a successful application. Do you want to address that at all?
Required? Absolutely not. Does it make for a stronger application? Yes. It just shows that projects are more advanced and that you know, funds can get out the door, projects can get on their feet more quickly than another.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that for a second, you know, our NOF team have made it a requirement. You're going to work with an architect because design matters. And we really want to have those catalytic projects look catalytic, not just be catalytic. So yeah, in this particular program, there's not going to be necessarily a requirement, but we are really going to prioritize those who have thought about design and thought about utilizing that particular resource.
Thanks. There's a question, do the projects have to be off a main commercial corridor or can it be on a residential street if that's kind of the targeted area? I think that gets into a little bit of zoning questions. I don't know if Jim or Tim, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, Tim, the short answer is, you know, you can always give us a call just to make sure that the zoning aligns with what your programming is. But yeah, the geography limitations that have been historically a part of our previous grant programs don't apply here. So we're not prioritizing necessarily projects on corridors, but yeah, it's important to make sure that the zoning aligns with the programming.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Jim, you know, the city of Chicago has an online interactive zoning map. So anyone can actually go to the DPD website, type in an address, and it'll tell you not just what zone it's in, but if you click on it, it'll open up and give you a description of what the allowed uses are. Applicants who demonstrate that they have reviewed that and ensured that they meet the requirements for the zoning are clearly going to show that, you know, to be a stronger application than someone who hasn't. If there are additional kind of zoning requirements that are needed, so for example, getting a zoning variance or a zoning special use, you don't necessarily have to already have it, but just indicating in the application that you know that part of your proposed business activity will require a zoning special use is going to go a long way compared to someone who's completely silent on that. So definitely take advantage of the wealth of information that is available online, as well as the community partners that we have to make sure that whatever site you're looking at, that it really does support not just the, you know, your vision, but the activities in that building and also how you're going to design that building.
Thanks. There's a question where it said, I have several businesses and I'm interested in using a grant for 3 of them. Does this person need to apply for each individual business or at the same time? Or, you know, would they lump it into one application?
I'll go ahead and answer that. I had answered this in writing with another participant. Every project needs to have its own application because the community engagement, the readiness is going to be different for every case, right? Zoning might be different. So if you have multiple sites, you will not be able to combine all of them into one application.
Thank you, Sophia. It's a good question. What type of documentation would be required to demonstrate community engagement? Do you have any kind of advice on that, or?
I mean, I think that there's some things that can be done, you know, and that there's things that we do on our end too, which is, you know, is it in alignment with, you know, a known community plan? You know, has there been a, you know, a quality of life plan or something like that has gone through and said that, look, in this area, there's a need for sit-down restaurants, something like that. You know, it could be yeah, I mean, that would be a great first start for something like that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. I think it's very important for applicants to not oversell because we do look at that information. I'll just give kind of a funny anecdote. We had an applicant for the NOF program several years ago that made a statement that they were the only sandwich shop within like a five block radius of the site that they had proposed. And we pulled it up on Google Street View and literally 2 doors down was a Subway. So I was like, okay, either we're misunderstanding the statement or, you know, they have made a statement that is not entirely accurate. So please, before you make any kind of generalization statements, do your research, have the evidence, the data to support the statements you're making. That will go a very long way to, again, demonstrating the priority that you have made in ensuring that your project is really going to mesh with the community's needs and desires.
Great. There's been a few questions about damaged properties and, you know, whether these funds could be used to repair properties that, you know, have due to fire damage or flooding, that type of thing.
Yeah, the short answer from our lens would be absolutely. This is what this is all about in terms of bringing, you know, some of these assets that have, for whatever reason, been dilapidated. One of the things that I will address within that question is that the funds can't be used to address any building code violations. Those building code violations would need to be addressed before. We encourage you to address it before putting in the application, because we do check to make sure if those buildings do have violations, and the funds cannot be used to remedy those violations.
There's a question is, can I apply as an individual, or do I need to apply as a company, or, some type of entity?
No restrictions.
There's some questions related to the timeline for announcing awardees, and the distribution of those funds. I believe that's still kind of being worked out and an exact timeline. We don't have like a specific decision date as of yet, correct? Or do you want to go ahead, Nicole?
Yeah, so I'll say we'll announce specific dates down the line, but anticipate a spring timeline for decisions.
It will probably also depend on the quantity of applications that come through, and because our staff, that's going to take, a significant amount of time to process all of those applications. So in terms of exact timeline, that'll be released at a further date. See, there were just a few questions, and reiterating that you can, apply for multiple rounds for different projects, or if during the first round, your project was not accepted, based on feedback that the department gives you, you can improve upon that application and resubmit at a later deadline day as well. So that is totally eligible. Let's see. Does anyone else see any big questions as I'm scrolling through here that we should tackle? I did see one asking about like hotel properties and whether hotels would qualify for this type of grant.
It's
Tim, I can make it easy. Make the argument.
yeah.
Put in the application.
Yeah,
Make the argument.
Great. Sorry, trying to scroll through a lot here. I guess this is a few questions about kind of the percentage of money that this grant can cover. Do we just want to, how much of the project expenses could be covered at a maximum by this grant? Just want to reiterate.
I think it's generally up to 5 million and up to 75% at the max. It could, of course, be less, and likely will be less.
There was a question about, can you explain what the pre-development phase would be and like what that would entail a little bit more?
I think generally it's the idea of you're going through all the entitlement process, which means like what do you need to do to get your project to the point to be ready to actually start construction, free and clear of any of the city's processes or licensing or building permits, zoning checks, things like that. And so I think the big pieces of this would be going through the zoning process to the extent it's needed. It might not be, going through the building process, which includes architecture and design work, and then getting your permits issued. And of course, on the non-city side of things is also financing, making sure that either, to the floor of 25% going up, whatever the grant is not covering has to either come from, debt, equity, fundraising. In some cases, it's just those funds accounted for. And
Great. I've seen there's a lot of kind of specific questions for like exact project types. And, I think we'll try to address those. After this webinar, we'll post a frequently asked questions kind of list and try to address some of these that we may not be able to get to, so that, please, we'll be adding more information to the webpage, chicago.gov/CHI recovery grant. And you can check back for updates as we're kind of going through this process there. yes, this is being recorded. It is being also live streamed right now on our YouTube page. So you'll be able to go back to this for reference at any time. A little bit more. Are there any other, Kevin, do you see any burning questions that we need to check into before we wrap up here?
Yeah, can I use this grant to start a transportation business? Sure, I think. There's a lot of questions about types here. Those will all be detailed at chicago.gov/child recovery grants. Yeah, I mean, this will be circulated to everybody who registered for this event on Zoom. There were more than 1,500 of you, and we had, I think, over 600 or 700 at one point in this meeting, so that was lovely. Thank you very much. Please define site control. There were many questions about site control. Can we hit on that one again?
Site control can mean a wide range of things. It can mean actually owning the land outright. You know, you control the deed and the title. That's the most obvious one. I think for the purposes of these applications, I mean, I would just say for anyone that's looking to apply, like if you definitely need a grant to do your project, do not acquire the property up front. I just have to stress that enough. We see this a lot. Do not acquire the property up front. That is what a non-binding letter of intent is for. You can certainly submit that for the purposes of how we look at the project and how we evaluate site control. You know, certainly owning the property, having a deed is yeah, you own it, that's yours. But a letter of intent, meaning you've engaged the property owner, you've had discussions with them about your interest in acquiring it, that's memorialized in a letter of intent. Like that's nearly as good. And frankly, you, the applicant, don't need to take a risk of acquiring a property where you know, you ultimately might not be awarded funds through a competitive process, but now you own it. And there's certainly risk and liability and frankly financial costs associated with owning a property.
Right. There are a few questions about whether their business needs to be
sorry,
located.
Gabby, one thing
Oh,
that just applies to actual acquisition. I think the same thing could be said about a lease though too. You know, a letter of interest for a lease is certainly a thing. If you as a business owner prefer to lease your space rather than own it.
Yes, good point. There were a few questions about whether the property needs to be located in the city of Chicago. Yes,
Absolutely.
I believe it needs to be city of
Absolutely.
Chicago property with the Chicago, Illinois address. Do you need to be a resident to apply for this grant?
No.
No. So if you live outside of the city, but the property is still in the city, you can still apply for this grant.
Tim, will an RDA be required for any of these? A redevelopment agreement?
Yeah, there'll certainly be a grant agreement at some point that just memorializes how the grants will go out the door, what the requirements are, what the project is, and all that stuff. So it's yeah.
Are pre-development costs eligible, such as architectural costs?
Yes.
I think this is a good one. Just are eligible expenses the same as SPIF and NOF, as in, can this cover equipment or is it purely kind of construction based?
It's not exactly one-to-one, but it is largely still construction based. Permanent building improvements.
Are cannabis related facilities eligible?
Yep.
Can substance abuse mental health centers apply?
Yeah. It's you know, we're putting very few restrictions on who can and can't apply. So it's nonprofits are able to apply. It's just how does it stack up against everything else? So yes.
There's a question about kind of requirements such as MBE, WBE, and city residency. Do we want to address any of that?
I think we have every anticipation that it'll be required for the large programs as they currently are, and the small programs do not have them.
Great. Okay, well, I think we have gone a little bit over our time on here, and there's a lot of really excellent questions. Thank you for submitting them. I think at this point, we'll probably just do a little bit of a recap here. I believe, Jim, do you want to?
Sure. No, again, I just want to make sure that we thank everyone for attending today's sessions on behalf of the Department of Planning and the Mayor's Office. We look forward to reviewing you guys' applications and your projects. We know we're going to see some exciting candidates. As Gabriella alluded to, this session was recorded, and the frequently asked questions will also be posted to our Chicago Recovery Plan Community Development Grant website at chicago.gov/Shy Recovery Grant. And as a matter of fact, if you just type in Shy Recovery Grant, the website should come up. For any additional questions, please feel free, and we encourage you guys to email dpd@cityofchicago.org. And I want to wish everyone the best of luck and look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thank you so much for participating, and let's have a great 2022. Thank you.
Thank you all.